Welcome to the Day in History for April 28th, day 43. Today is the day that British Captain James Cook aboard the HMS Endeavour lands in Botany Bay in Australia. Botany Bay is Sydney. It's a really cool place though. Now the big idea is that humans need to explore. We have a need to explore. We might give a whole lot of different reasons why we need to do it, but it's kind of a basic human tendency to want to know more about things that we don't know about, especially when they're unknowns. For people in this time period, unknowns were in the Pacific Ocean. We hadn't explored it all. We hadn't charted the islands. We didn't know what was out there. And so many different countries sent out expeditions to explore and map and, well, claim territory. We'll talk more about that later. So I'll let you write this down. Here we go. Now we are in Australia. We are in Sydney. Australia is a big place. And up until this time, it hadn't been discovered yet by Europeans. Now, if we were to imagine a really, really nice place to park ships, to have a harbor, Botany Bay would be pretty nice. I mean, just look at that. Doesn't that look like a pretty good place to take your ship in and have it protected from the ocean waves and from storms? And it was a pretty good find for James Cook. So, now this is actually one of the maps that he drew during his voyage. It's pretty accurate, and one of the things James Cook was known for was his cartography skills, or his ability to draw maps. Now, let's go back to James Cook's early life. He was born in 1728 in a place near Yorkshire, England. His dad was a farmer, and it's said that James Cook really never had a lot of formal education. He didn't go to one of those fancy schools. He taught himself math and many of these other skills, and really learned a lot himself. Now, we're going to fast forward a little bit to the 7 Years' War, and we talk a little bit about this because when we talked about the American Revolution, this war took place between England and France right before the American Revolution. And this is where George Washington got his start, and this is also where James Cook got his start as well. Now, he was on some ships that were stationed over near Canada, and during his time on these ships, he was recognized for his skill in seamanship, leadership, as well as astronomy, because charting the stars was huge at this time because it was part of the way that they navigated. But he was also recognized for his skill in making maps. And maps were so important because if you had a good map, you could send other people there. It's not like today where we have GPS and satellites and Google Earth and you can type in an address, hit a button, and you know where to go. This was way back when it was really difficult to find out where you were going. So, now the ship that he was eventually assigned is called the HMS Endeavour. We actually named one of our space shuttles after it, the Endeavour. Pretty cool. Now, this was a fairly large ship. It was 97 feet long, had a crew of about 94. There were, I think, 71 sailors, 12 Marines, so like soldiers, and 11 civilians. And they were given a mission. Now, the ship itself is really cool. There's some good websites that you can look at that describe what these early 18th century ships were like. They were pretty cramped. They were small. I mean, small comparatively speaking, but if you put 94 people on this little ship, I know I just said it was big, but it would feel kind of small when you got on it. There's a video that we watched last year where some Australian students, elementary school students, get to take a tour of the HMS Endeavour because they actually have a full-size replica in Australia. But it's a pretty interesting idea to live on this ship for years, because they often did live on these ships for years. Now, the two main people in our story are going to be James Cook here, and then the naturalist whose name was Joseph Banks. Now, these guys had a mission, and their mission... What? Oh, yes, their mission was to watch the transit of Venus. I was kind of surprised by this as well. So they were sent out into the ocean so that they could see Venus pass in front of the sun. Now, this was actually part of their cover story. I mean, it was an important scientific thing that they were going to do, but they actually had a secret mission. He had orders in a sealed envelope that he wasn't supposed to open until he got underway about his secret mission. And his secret mission was to find Terra Australia. So there were many people, map makers, philosophers, scientists at the time that believed there was this continent at the bottom of the earth that no one had found yet, called Terra Australia, something like that. Now, they hadn't found it yet, and part of Cook's mission was to locate this continent and, well, probably to claim it for England. Now, he went and started his mission down to look for Venus, watch Venus, and look for this continent. And he took this route. Now, as you can see, he left from England, came down through below South America, and then came over to New Zealand, and then eventually found Australia. He made quite a few maps. This is one of the maps that he made of Australia. It doesn't look quite right, but it's pretty good. You can see Botany Bay up there. Now, there's a couple different reasons why sailors or why explorers would go on these missions. We mentioned the need to find Terra Australis and to do scientific observations. But one of the big things was simply to make maps. We didn't have maps of the world. Could you imagine how annoying it would be to have a map with an empty spot? It's kind of like when you're building a puzzle and you just have a few pieces left. There's something in our minds that wants us to fill in those last few pieces. And it's pretty satisfying to put that last piece in. Part of the big map, the big puzzle of the world, was to fill in those blank spots. And that's what these explorers did. And that's why being able to draw and make maps was so important. So making maps was important. Another important thing was colonization. Australia was colonized by the British, and very shortly they went from 1,000 people to 1,000,000 people, and now it's a full-on country filled with Australians. Now, colonization has a lot of impacts on the people that live there. We're not going to talk about that during this, but we've talked about it in previous days in history, in particular when we talked about the discovery of America and what happened to the Native Americans. The same thing happened in Australia. It's a sad story, but we're not going to go into that right now. So, colonization or new territory. Another thing, and this is really cool, and this is why Joseph Banks was there, was the naturalists. Now, we didn't have photographers. There were no photos. And so people were fascinated by all these new creatures and plants and animals and all these new things that we were finding. And so they would record them. And they would go out and they would capture specimens and they would draw them and they would measure them and weigh them and they would add them to this scientific book of knowledge that we were creating. Now, some of these pictures, this is just one of the pictures, but people would draw these animals, and there are thousands of these pictures, and they're really amazing to look at. Pretty cool stuff. Now, Cook went on a few other voyages. He went on 3 voyages, and he was known for trying to find the Northwest Passage, which is a passage through North America. Never did find that. He went up to the coast of Washington, California, all over there, and he did go to Hawaii. Now, we have another day in history about James Cook and Hawaii. I'm going to briefly talk about this because, well, it's kind of an interesting story. Now, James Cook went to Hawaii and showed up during a fertility festival, or part of their one of their religious time periods. And well, there's a few different stories, but in a nutshell, James Cook found himself in a position where he kidnapped one of the kings and found himself getting killed. There's a lot more to this story, and there's actually quite a few different stories about James Cook. And it really depends on which perspective you look at it from, which historian you look at it from. And you also have to really think about who was writing these histories and what they were trying to say. There are still websites today that you look up that say that the Hawaiians thought he was a god. But there's also other websites and other historians that say, no, that's not the case. And so to talk about James Cook and how he died and the particulars or the reasons that he got killed in such a short time period wouldn't really be fair. So I would say that this would make a really good research topic, because you have to really be careful which perspective or which side you're hearing the story from, because they are going to be very, very different stories. And to be honest, that's one of the reasons I love history so much and why I focus on it so much in class, is because if you don't understand which side of the story you're hearing, you're not going to actually get the true story, if it's even possible to get the true story. Our goal as historians is to get as much of the truth as possible, and that starts with understanding who's telling the story and why they're telling the story. So, I'm going to leave you with a replica of the HMS Endeavour. If I ever get to go to Australia, I think I'm going to add that to my list of things to do in my life. I'm going to go see this ship, because you can actually take a tour and walk around it, and there's some pretty cool stuff. There's a video, if you type in HMS Endeavour replica and look for a video, you'll find the video of these students. It's an Australian news report. But these students get a walk around the HMS Endeavour. It's pretty cool. So I would recommend that. Thank you for watching, and I will see you tomorrow.